much for sitting down with me today. I've heard only a little bit about your story. So do you want to introduce yourself and just start from the beginning,
Yeah,
I guess?
yeah, for sure. Well, thanks for having me. My name's Anthony. I came to prison when I was 16. I was a juvenile crime offender. I was sentenced under mandatory minimum sentencing in Measure 11. I was given 32 and a half years for a murder that I committed. Basically, I shot a man over this older woman that I was dating, and there was gang affiliations going on. He was from a gang, I was from a rival gang, and there's tension back and forth. And yeah, I got sentenced to 32 years. I've been in prison 24 years now, and so I have about 8 years left. But basically, my journey, I guess, begins in county jail. When I was 16, they took me directly to adult county jail, and so I spent a little over a year there, awaiting trial and whatnot. And while I was there, when I first got there, they put me directly into segregation. So I'd never been in trouble before, never been in jail, and so that was new, completely segregated from everybody. I was there for like 3 days, and then they had me sign this waiver saying that they would let me out of segregation as long as I agreed that if anything ever happened to me, that I wouldn't sue and things like that because of my age, because I was a juvenile. So I signed that. Went into what I thought was general population, but they actually, and I didn't know how it worked then at the time, but they moved me from segregation into like protective custody unit with these guys that were in protective custody. So I go there and they put me in a cell with a guy that was a convicted child molester. So I'm 16 and they're putting me in this cell with this old guy who was there for molesting kids. And I didn't know what was going on. I didn't really know prison politics or anything at the time. Somebody that had seen me go into this section that was like segregated knew me and was like, hey, that guy that you're celled up in there with, you got to get out of there. And so I'm like, well, what do you mean? And so they're like explaining this to me on the tier. And luckily for me, the other guys on the tier who knew me made that dude move out, and what's called kicking out, where they made him hit the door until the police came and took him out of there. But that was like my first experience with jail, and for me, it kind of set the tone of like who I could and trust. For me, I was like, well, I can't trust COs. They just literally put me in harm's way, and the only people looking out for me were other inmates, and so that kind of set the tone. And going forward, it made it hard for me to trust authority, and it gave me this like real us versus them mentality where I on the other side is like untrustworthy. And then when I was going through trial, on top of that, I went and got at my sentencing there was I got sentenced to 32 years, right? And I deserved every minute of it. Let's be clear. I shot and killed a man, and I had it coming. But the part of it that also struck me and that made me distrust authority even more was that the woman that I was involved with, she got off on all the charges. She was initially charged with murder too for aiding and abetting. And then we got a joint trial, and she got off and went free. But she was 24 and I was 16, and so at the time they were charging me as an adult. And when they couldn't get her for any of the aiding and abetting, they ended up charging her for sex abuse of a minor. So I was getting charged as adult, so in one sense they seen me, an adult for the crime that I committed, saying that I needed to be held responsible as an adult for the crime I committed. But when it was convenient for them, they turned around and used my age to convict women that I was with sex abuse of a minor.
Yeah.
So that kind of, between that and my experience in county jail, I was like, all right, obviously authority doesn't count me, so why should I care either? I felt like I was just truly alone in a world full of adults who just hated me. And so I really developed this, us versus them mentality where my focus was really on just trying to survive this next 32 years in prison. When I went to OIA, they had a bunch of programs. They had violent offender treatment and things that I got involved with when I was in OIA. And that really opened up my eyes to a lot of things and made me kind of change my tune a little bit. And when I first committed my crime, up until when I went to McLaren, I was really justifying what I did because there were some circumstances around it where, he had my victim had shot him and had threatened to kill me and the girl that I was with. So I was like, well, in my mind at the time as a young kid, I was like, well, he had that coming. When I got to McLaren, they really helped me take away some of those justifications that I was using. And, I realized then that, that he was a human being. And regardless of what the circumstances were, he didn't deserve what I did to him.
Yeah.
And so that was a real wake-up call for me, where it stripped away all justifications, and it made me really think about things, and it hurt. That was the first time that I was like, oh my God, what did I do? After those justifications are gone, it's really hard to sit with that, because you live with it by justifying what you did, right? So that was difficult, and I actually, had some communication with victims' parents, and they filled me up with things that I didn't know, and that, made me start thinking about his mom and his family and what they were going through, and that just sent me on a whole other trip. And so I started, being more receptive to the treatment and drug and alcohol and anger management and all of these things after that, and really started kind of working towards bettering myself. At the same time, I knew that I was going to have to go to prison because my sentence was only going to allow me to stay at McLaren until I was 24, and then I was going to the Department of Corrections. So the whole time that I was in OA, I'm hearing all of these, horrible stories about, people getting assaulted, raped, you're going to have to fight, you're going to have to do this, that, and the other. So that's always in the back of my mind, as I'm changing and I'm doing these things better myself, those things are in the back of my mind. So when I finally left McLaren to go upstate to the Department of Corrections, I was super hyper vigilant. I was on guard for any type of attack, and to top it off, my victim was a member of a gang that had friends upstate, and I was also had gang affiliations when I was going upstate. My dad was a gangbanger. My uncles all from Southern California, all of them the same thing. It was all gangbanging. And so I knew I was going to have to deal with that. So my reaction, I felt like my choices were really limited. It was like, what am I going to do? Am I going to go to cops and ask to be put in custody? And that, for me, that was an option. Or is I'm going to fight and try to protect myself. And that's what I did. And so it sent me down a path for a good 10 years where, I was in and out of segregation, I was involved with all the prison politics, and I was doing all these things that I really didn't want to do. I had made these changes and I was holding on to them, but I felt that my options were so limited that I didn't have too much of a choice. So I did that for 10 years and was involved in those things, and it wasn't. And the whole time, I was trying as best as I could to keep who I was, keep what happened with the changes I made in McLaren. But it was hard because I think two of the most important things that especially young guys need when they're coming to prison is you need hope, which didn't have. I had no hope of getting out, so it was like, okay, this is where I'm going to spend the rest of my life. And I think relationships are really important, and the relationships that we have with people on the street, relationships we have with people in prison. And so, my relationships consisted of, gang members that were in the same, situation that I was in, that, were scared, that felt they had to do these things in order to protect themselves. And so we're just feeding off each other, and it creates an environment that's really toxic. And, well, I could one up you, you can do that, well, I'm going to do this. You know what I mean? And before you know it, you're just involved in this lifestyle where you don't see any hope for a future, and you lose all your relationships. In prison, I think by its very nature is the isolating and violent place to live. You lock somebody into a cell for 23 hours a day, that's an act of violence. You know what I mean? You're committing violence against that person. So a lot of times, I think people that come from environments that I come from with, a dad and uncles that were gang members, they came from these, this culture of crime, and where a lot of times they were victims themselves of abuse and whatnot. When you put them in a prison setting, and you tell them, okay, we're going to cut you off from everybody you love, we're going to give you a sentence that gives you no hope of ever getting out. What do you
Yes.
expect these people to do? They have nothing at that point. And
Absolutely.
so, that's what I was going through. I was going through that, and it took me some years to get out of that situation. And I did, thank God. And now, I got involved with a couple different organizations that deal with juvenile justice. And one of the things we did was try to bring in the lawmakers in here, and we talked to lawmakers about the need to pass juvenile justice bills. And I was able to help, along with some other guys in here, get Senate Bill 108 passed here in Oregon, which basically did away with Measure 11 for juveniles. And I shared my story, and other guys shared their story about how, relationships are important. And when you take the kids and you send them to 25, 30, 40 years in prison, it doesn't do them any good, it doesn't do the victims any good, it doesn't do society any good. And at that point, nobody's needs are being met. The victims of crimes, their needs are not met half the time. They want to know what's happening, what's going on. Why did this person do this? What?
Absolutely.
And they don't get any of those answers.
No, they don't.
Just like, yeah. And so I just feel like the justice system for me is, we need to really take an honest look and look at ourselves and like, what is it for? Is justice system to rehabilitate people, or is it just to punish people? And they say it's for rehabilitation and for integration back into society, but a lot of times it doesn't feel like that, especially when you're sentencing 16-year-olds to 30 plus years in prison with no hope and no relations.
Yes.
So that's kind of where I'm at, and those are my thoughts on some of those issues.
So you were incarcerated when you were very, very young, like you were a child, and so I'm from Canada, and we're really big on rehabilitation here. And this is just an example of a case where two girls who were another female, they were all 14 and 16. A bunch of kids recording, and simply because they thought that the girl had flirted with their boyfriends, so they start recording and they beat her up to death on live on Facebook. So these girls get charged, and each, the 14-year-old and the 16-year-old, only do a year and a half each, and then they're released out into the public. So, I believe that was, to me, that was not justice, because they didn't, what could you have possibly learned in a program in a year and a half while incarcerated? There's no way. But as opposed to your case, what do you think would be a time frame where, how long did it take you for you to realize, oh, I made a mistake?
There needs to be a happy medium. I think, somebody getting out, like you said, after a year and a half of incarceration, killing somebody does not seem like just family, and it doesn't feel like that person's really have learned anything at the point.
Yes.
I think brain science should inform our decisions on sentencing, and science should inform our decisions on sentencing. And so they've shown that people's brains, they're not fully developed until they're like 25 years old, right?
Yes.
And so you see, especially kids, right? Kids do stupid things all the time, and we, as an adult, I'm 40 years old now, and I look back at my past mistakes and I'm like, what the hell was I thinking?
Yes.
It makes no sense.
Yes.
But a 16 or a 14-year-old, it does make sense. And everything at that point when you're a kid is super hyped up. Everything is the end of the world. Everything is so dramatic.
Yes.
So I think in a situation like that, we got these two girls who have done this horrible thing. They need to be held accountable, but they also need to get the treatment that they need to be better human beings when they get out.
Absolutely.
And I think something along the lines of incremental, looking at these people as they age, saying, okay, where are you at now at 20 years old as opposed to 15 or 14? Where are you at now at 25 as opposed to 20? Because I know that my line of thinking is way different today at 40 than it was at 30 or 25 or 16. So I think there's ways to go about it where it's not just about punishment. It's about holding people accountable, but also giving them the tools that they need to be successful upon release. And also the victims. The victims. This poor girl lost her life, and now this family doesn't have their daughter anymore, and they need to have some sort of say to it. I think collectively, everybody's needs need to be met in
Yes.
that situation,
Yes.
and unfortunately, in that situation, the victim's needs are not being met. And I don't think I don't know for a fact, but I wouldn't even think that those two kids, I don't think their needs are being met either, because
No.
they're not going to probably learn a whole lot after a year and a half.
No. No, they're not. Have you been in contact with the victims, or like the victim's family? Like, have you ever reached out, or did they ever reach out to you?
Yeah, I was fortunate enough actually when I was at McLaren. McLaren OA. There's a lot of really great things about the program there, and there were some pretty horrible things too, but there were some really good things.
Okay.
And one of the things that helped me was that I was involved in this program. It was a violent offender treatment program, and one of the managers there actually helped me indirectly reach out to my victim's family and pass messages back and forth. And that was really the pivotal moment, honestly, where all this justification, I just gone. Hearing my victim's mom talk about the impact that it had on her, and some of the things that was going on in his life and her life, it changed my life. It seriously did. It's hard to hear that you're the cause of so much pain, and so yeah, I had some indirect. I never talked to them directly. It was all through messages back and forth through the treatment providers that I was there with. I invited my victims' parents to come in and come see me if they wanted to. Understandably, they denied. They didn't want to come in, which I get.
Absolutely.
But I felt like I had to extend that to them.
Was that hard to reach out? Like was that that must have been hard for you?
It was extremely difficult, and I was, I feel like once those justifications came off, and I started seeing my victim as a human being, and I started seeing what I did was horrible. Then I felt like, okay, now I owe it, not only to my victims, but to other people to continue to give back, to try to make sure that this doesn't happen again. And I think part of that is reaching back to the victim saying, like, listen, I know you have questions about what happened, and there's nothing I could ever do to make up for what I did, but I will try to help any way I can. And I hope, and I think that they left that. I'm not going to say feeling better, because they're not going to. You can't feel better about losing a son, but I think they left with some answers that they didn't previously have, and I hope that helped them through the healing process.
Of course, yes. So you went in, you were a teenager and having to transition into a man in prison. How was your mental health?
Now I'm in a lot of different places than what I was when I was 16. Fortunately, I have my mental health is good, and I don't struggle with mental health issues. You get the same thing that a lot of people get. People get depressed and they feel down and out about the situation. But for me, I've been lucky in that aspect, and I did spend a good amount of time in segregation at one point where I was in that safe all the time. And that takes a tremendous toll. It took a toll on my mental health, and I've seen it just deteriorate people to the point of where they're not functional anymore.
Yes.
So I think it's another thing that the justice system really needs to look at is putting people in a cell for 23 hours a day by themselves. It's not helping anybody. It's not going to help them. It's not going to help society. I mean, like if you think about it anyway, if I was out there on the community and I had a guy getting out of prison that just spent 6 months in segregation and now he lives next door to me, like I wouldn't want that. I want somebody to come out healthier and not worse. And that's exactly what segregation does. It just makes things worse for people.
Absolutely. It's torture. It's inhumane. Like you need contact with other humans. Like you can't. Like you can be so introverted, but you still need contact. With the outside world. You can't just be by yourself. No one is designed to be alone.
You're absolutely right.
Do you think that the gang violence and like contraband that comes into the prisons, if because you when you guys work in there, they pay you like pennies, literally.
Right.
So an adult that's incarcerated, it makes I think maybe $60 a month. So and this is like full-time job. Do you think if they paid you guys regular wages like they do people out here, the violence and the amount of contraband that does come in through the prison would at least significantly lower?
Well, that's a really good question, and that's actually an issue that I'm pretty passionate about. Is the issue of slave labor? You know, it's written in the Constitution, the 13th Amendment, and basically, forcing somebody to work is not good unless, of course, you're convicted of a felony, and then we can force you to work, right? For
Right.
pennies. And so
Yes.
you're making, like you said, $60 a month. And if you just look at what's going on in the current events today, inflation out there is through the roof, right? So everything can cost a lot more money. Well, we have got a pay raise in 20 years, and so
Yes.
before $60 used to stretch a lot further.
Yes.
Now you go, to the canteen with $60, and you're getting enough hygiene basically to last you a month. And that's it.
Yes.
You're not getting food and all these other. So it does contribute to extortion. It contributes to a lot of gang activity. A lot of the things that go on in here that are bad for everybody. You know what I
Yes.
mean? Because people got, and so they're looking at it this way, like, well, I don't got no hope. You're separating me from my family. You're giving me $50 a month. I can't live off of that, so I'm going to do what I have to do to survive. And then that's
Yes.
when you get the extortion that happens, the gambling and the drugs and all
Exactly.
those other things.
Absolutely.
Not to mention the fact that slave labor is not good for anybody, and that should not. And a lot of people think that doesn't go on in the United States anymore. But convict leasing is a thing, where they take people that are in prison and they lease them out to state agencies and businesses
Yeah.
to do the work that otherwise not only are the people in prison only getting $60 an hour or whatever it is, but that's jobs that people out there in the community could be utilizing to better themselves and their family and their situation. So
Absolutely.
it's all around. It's a horrible concept to make people work for based on dollars.
You wrote an essay that was published, and I don't know if did you write more than one? Like, have you had more than one of your pieces published?
Yeah, I had another thing that I had done is I'm working really hard right now on voting rights for people that are incarcerated, and we actually had a bill that was put forth a couple of years ago, or 2 years now almost, to try to give organ prisoners voting rights, and it had a lot of support. I gave a speech about the subject to lawmakers. There were like 15 or 16 lawmakers that supported it, and it just unfortunately hadn't passed. I think they're going to try to push it again. But I co-authored a report with this organization called Next Up. It's a pro-democracy organization and the report was about voting rights for prisoners, or why it's so important for prisoners to have voting rights. And so, yeah, there's that. And then the other thing that I wrote was for the appeal, this online publication, and that was about similar to what we're talking about today, about the need for positive relationships for guys that are coming to prison, the need for hope, the need for this restorative type of justice instead of just punishment.